Thank you so much for coming. My name is Harriet Bloom Wilson. I'm the CEO of Wyoming Rising Northwest, a nonprofit grassroots organization that was founded in February 2017. Our mission is to give a voice to Wyoming citizens. We believe in protecting the values on which our democracy was founded: an open, inclusive society, civil liberties for all citizens, access to public education and affordable health care, protection of the environment, and a free press. We have a steering committee, board members, and interest committees that bring forward issues which translate into actions. Today's event emerged from our Community Outreach Committee under the leadership of Buzzy Hasrick and Shirley Stevens. It represents a key goal of Wyoming Rising, which is to provide opportunities for diverse perspectives to come together, to listen, and to educate each other with the shared purpose of making every member of our community feel valued, heard, respected, and safe. Only by listening to each other can we hope to make informed decisions on who represents us and what actions we need to take to be truly engaged in our democracy. And I think we can all agree that without civil discourse, there will be no meaningful discussion or resolution. So on behalf of Wyoming Rising, I want to thank each member of the panel, Governor Sullivan, Mayor Brown, Board Member Overfield, and Senator Simpson. Thank you so much. I want to thank each of the members for offering their insight into what is on the minds of people all over the country: the search for civility. And to all those who are filling this room who recognize how vital it is for us to ask the critical questions that will no doubt emerge during the next 90 minutes. Now it's my honor and pleasure to introduce the Honorable Steve Cranfill, recently retired. And we are so pleased to have Judge Steve Cranfield here as a moderator. And he will be introducing the panel and setting out the criteria, the parameters for our 90-minute conversation. Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. In 1752, when George Washington was 16 years old, he had copied out by hand 110 rules of civility and decent behavior in company and conversation. They're based on a set of rules composed by French Jesuits in 1595. Some of them may seem silly, but they reflect at the time a concern for behavior towards others. I certainly am not going to read all 110, but I found a few interesting that I'll share with you. Every action done in company ought to be with some sign of respect to those that are present. Sleep not when others speak. Sit not when others stand. Speak not when you should hold your peace. Walk not when others stop. Spit not into the fire, nor stoop low below it before it, neither put your hands into the flames to warm them, or don't set your feet upon the fire, especially if there is meat before it. Associate yourself with men of good quality, if you esteem your own reputation, for it is better to be alone than in bad company. Speak not evil of the absent, for it is unjust. Put not your meat to your mouth with your knife in your hand, neither spit forth the stones of any fruit pie upon a dish nor cast anything under the table. And put not another bite into your mouth till the former be swallowed. Let not your morsels be too big for your jowls. So I did what we all do these days. I Googled civility. There are numerous publications available that have come out in about the last 10 years. Choosing Civility, the 25 Rules of Considerate Conduct. Mastering Civility, a manifesto for the workplace. Civility, how civility works. The civility solution, what to do when people are rude. Mere civility, disagreement and the limits of toleration. George Washington's Rules of Civility. The case for civility and why our future depends upon it. I should have brought my other glasses. Saving civility, 52 ways to tame rude, crude, and attitude for a polite planet. And one that is free. Learn workplace civility, a free tutorial. And then, in the midst of all of that, I kid you not, essential hot tubs, civility, 60 jets, acrylic hot tub, $3,999, and it's right there. So, to a recent time, Senator Orrin Hatch wrote an editorial on June 28th, 2017. It begins, an active shooter recently attempted to assassinate Republican members of Congress at an early morning practice in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. for a softball game. Days earlier, a man spewing anti-Muslim hate speech fatally stabbed 2 individuals on public transport in Portland, Oregon. The month before, protesters came to fisticuffs at dueling political rallies in Berkeley, California. Events such as these add to the growing sense that something has been broken in our politics, something that once moderated our partisan feelings and bridled out our basic instincts has gone missing in an era of unprecedented polarization. Something fundamental to our civic culture has been lost amid the chaos and the disruption of the information age. The question is, what has been lost? In a word, civility. Civility is the indispensable political norm. It is the public virtue that has greased the wheels of our democracy since its inception. Although nowhere mandated in the Constitution, civility is no less essential to the proper functioning of our government than any amendment, court ruling, or act of Congress. Without it, little separates us from the cruelty and the chaos of rule by force. And so, we move along to this distinguished panel. Dossie Overfield, a school board chairman, Nancy Brown, a mayor, Mike Sullivan, a governor, ambassador, Al Simpson, a precinct committee man and stay-at-home grandfather. Obviously, the roast happened a couple of weeks ago, and I've not forgotten it. Okay, so this is for all of you. I'm going to start reading questions that have been already submitted by the audience. And I think there are cards out there for you to continue to do that. If you want to address a question to a single member of the panel, feel free to do so, and we'll ask them to respond. Or otherwise, we'll assume your question is for the entire group. So let's begin in the order that the panelists were introduced, which would be Dossie, Nancy, Mike, and Al. How did you handle the opposition, either in government or from your constituents? If the voices got loud and heated, what strategies did you use to foster a productive discussion?
There were several occasions while I was school board chair that I guess my main thing was to stop the discussion when things got a little too pushy and a little too loud, and ask people to just calm down, think about what we're doing, think about why we're here. And in my case, it was a single topic. It was always what's best for kids. And so when we had those discussions, everybody's passionate about their students. But if you just took time to ask people to take a breath, think about what you're saying, it's not necessarily what you say, it's how you say it. So yes, we got some criticism and well-deserved at times. We needed to think about what we were doing. But I think asking people to take a breath and just think about what they're saying and how they're being perceived gives people time to think.
That's a great answer, Dossie. I had the pleasure of working with Dossie on the school board for 6 years. She was a great leader and continues to be. In my case, when I was elected mayor, it was very important to me that things be handled civilly. I was kind of proactive about it. And so I sat with my council and I said, this is how we're going to do business. And when we would have an occasion in the council chambers for there to be what we knew was probably going to be a rather heated discussion, I believe that in some ways the precedent had already been set, because I always tried in the council chambers to make sure that respect was handled among the council members. You lead by example. And then I expected it when people came to us to speak. I asked gentlemen to remove their hats. And I asked them nicely, and they did it. And there's just a tone that can be set so that when things do become a little more heated, that tone is already there. What I tried to do, if I anticipated that there was going to be a discussion that might cause controversy, and of course among a city, it's just like among the school, everyone has strong feelings. And in case you didn't notice, Cody folks are participants. They want to be involved, and that's a great thing. But anyway, I would try to frame the subject at hand. Say, okay, this is what we're going to talk about. I know there are two sides to this. This is how we're going to handle it. And if someone cannot be civil, unfortunately, you probably aren't going to be able to stay at this meeting. And there were only a couple of times, and there were a couple of times where I did ask someone to leave a meeting because they were not behaving, comporting themselves as they should as an adult and as a responsible citizen in our community. But that's kind of what I did. I tried to set the tone all the time, tried to set it by example with myself and my council, and then I tried to frame the issue and then hold people. I didn't care what they said, but as Dossie says, it's how you say it and how you comport yourself in front of others. Governor?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Let me start by saying, in my opinion, these two ladies represent the most difficult political positions in the country. The closer you get to the constituency, the more, and to home, the more difficult are the issues. And I can't add much to what they said, except that I think to assure that there is an understanding in advance, not to wait until incivility raises its head and then try to cut it off, but assure that there are standards and rules that can be followed and that they're understood, and then follow them. And then listen. I think the most difficult meetings I had when I first got elected I was elected in 86, took office in 87, and many of you will remember the nature of our economy at that time. And as a farm loan board, the elected officials were foreclosing regularly on farms and ranches. And we had public meetings where the people who were being foreclosed or about to be foreclosed came in to make take their positions. Now, nothing could have been more personally difficult for us or for them. But what we learned early is that if you had rules, as I've said, and two, if they thought you were listening, if you were willing to hear their story and not just act like you're listening, but truly listen, have empathy with the issues, then there wasn't difficulty. They understood, in their heart of hearts, understood where we had to go. But I think that was a lesson learned early that served me well for the rest of my time.
Well, I certainly concur with Mike. My dad told me never run for the school board, and or county attorney. That was the other one. And I've watched these two remarkable people, and so many others in Cody who do this, because if you're in public life, you're entitled to be called a fool, boob, idiot, rothead, and I could go on, and you know my vocabulary is complete. But you're never, ever allow someone to distort who you are as a person. That's a critical thing. And when they would do that with me, I would rise up and rant a little. That's not the point of the question, but I can tell you that when you're administering a large body of people, and I'm not an administrator, I was a legislator, a great difference. But if you must teach people to address the chair. That's a critical thing, because if they begin to look over at this person that's just giving them a fit, they begin to address that person. And then it turns rotten, and always will. So you just say, would you please address the chair, address the school board chairman, address the mayor, address the governor, or the congressman? That's a critical issue. Address the chair, which removes the teeth of the personal attack, or it should have. Let the speaker finish. I was at Harvard. Don't throw anything. I couldn't have got into Harvard if I'd picked the locks. And so there I was, and I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it. And when I got there, the speaker would start, and there was controversy. McNamara, Ralph Reed, socialists, commies, right-wing, left-wing cuckoos, all of them, and the students would begin to hiss and snort while they were speaking. And I thought, what the hell, what do I got to lose? I got up and I said, I want you to shut up. When these people are speaking, I don't want to hear any groaning, moaning, sighing, and when they're through in the question period, you can just have a big ball, but not, and which is the art of listening. And then finally, I had a strange ability, I guess it wasn't always that. I would say to my staff, where are they after my butt? Well, in Gillette. You missed the fact that those black helicopters were changing the water out there at night, and 8 people were, and I said, well, I guess I did miss that. And but I'd listen, and I'd speak for 5 minutes and stay for 2 hours and let them rip. Never stopped any kind of questioning, never had them write anything down, because they're paying you, and you deserve to take their stuff. And you try to respond and try to answer it, even if they don't agree. It's critical that you answer and give them your reason why you're doing it, which ain't theirs. And they can go sort it out. That was, I found, very effective. It kept the wolves away wherever it might have been. But that's a critical thing, too.
Thank you. Let me just say that in the legal system, we have the rules of civil procedure, and we have the local rules of district court, which were put into place within the last 10 years, and it was in direct response to to this concern. And so as judges, the rule clearly says that every attorney is to conduct themselves in a courteous manner, and that their demeanor should reflect respect and courtesy for everyone in the courtroom. And that includes those people on the witness stand that they're cross-examining. And that if they violate that the court has the authority to sanction them. That can be a monetary sanction. You write a check before you leave this courthouse, where you'll go to jail, or they could be removed from the hearing. So we had some flexibility that you don't have in these other venues that have been discussed, and I always appreciated that. Al, let's begin with you, if we can. How did we get here, and where are we going? And if you can do that in about 5 minutes, please.
Well, I can't cover the vast scope of that pungent question, which you just gleefully concocted this morning with vigor, now crossing your arms like a judge over there. I tell you where I saw it, at least in my venue, which was the U.S. Senate. That's where I began to see. And don't forget, this stuff doesn't just start with Congress. It starts in the baseball field. It starts in the city council. It starts in the school board. It doesn't just suddenly arise in the tumbled world of Washington, D.C., where everybody's an idiot. It's right down there in your home ground, at everything, in every level. But it was what I saw was the House of Representatives had been controlled by one party for 40 years. Now, I would say the same thing if it were the Republican Party or the Democrat. In fact, the State House has been controlled by the Republicans for a huge number of years, and I think that doesn't work, and it isn't working right now. So over in the House, you're a House member, you're a minority, and you're at a council or hearing, and you got a really great amendment, and you put it to the staff and say, give this to the chairman. The chairman looks at it and says, hey, great. Just scratch out that boob's name and put my name, and that's a good amendment. I'll take the credit for that, okay? Then you begin to seethe. You see people beginning to seethe, and they had this amendment. Their constituents at home knew what they were going to do. You put it in, and it disappeared because the majority just grabbed it, took it, and told you to hit it. So even the masters got tired of beating the slaves over there. And so they said, I'm going to run for the U.S. Senate. To hell with this over here. And they came, and they brought the venom with them. They brought now this guy's a Republican. I'm going to get him because I've had it shoveled at me over there in the House. So this guy's a Democrat. And I could name, and I won't, the names of the fine Congress people, both parties, who came to the U.S. Senate with hostility and anger, real anger and venom toward the other side because of the way they've been treated. So they began to do that same kind of treatment in the U.S. Senate. And you could see it. Dole and I saw it, Cranston. I mean, I worked with George Mitchell, magnificent man, who told me one day, as a dear friend, that these troubles in Ireland would never have been settled without Mike Sullivan, as he was ambassador. So I worked with Cranston, most liberal guy I ever worked with in my life, Kennedy. I didn't care how they lived or who they slept with or whatever the hell. That business is not mine. All I cared about when they shook my hand, did they keep their promise? And they did. They'd say, I'm not for you. I'm going to kill that amendment. Great. I am for you. Or I won't show up, which is another good deal. So that's, but the venom to me as to how it happened was that. And they were rigid people and nasty. And they'd been burned, and they were going to go burn the Senate down at the same time. What was the second part of that monstrous thing?
Where do we go from here?
Well, Annie and I decided that instead of just sitting around bitching, which is a beautiful trait here. And Wyoming people are thoughtful, well-read, highly opinionated. And that's a terrific thing. But finally, when you just keep bitching, and we'd go to the Central Committee meeting, and I know this will lead to passion amongst the crew here, this woman from our precinct got up and said the sole purpose of marriage is procreation. Well, there was a muffled applause for that, and then when my turn came, I said, if any of you really believe that, you're missing a hell of a lot of fun. which did not go well. So we ran for precinct committee man and woman of precinct 25-1, and that's exactly what we did 60 years ago. And we are now there doing that. Not as good as we should, but that's what you do. That's the lowest form. That's the amoeba of politics. So pick your party and get in the game. Don't just howl into the vapors. That's not going to get you anywhere. Carrying a sign won't get you anywhere either. So if you don't want to get in the game in some way, well then, at least, when you come to me and tears are streaming down your cheeks and saying, what the hell's happened to America? I said, too many people are sitting on the sidelines and watching their favorite program, which embraces everything they believe in, and they don't care a damn about the other side.
Well, in talking from the school board side of where we've been and where we're going to go, the interesting thing to me was in the 12 years I was on the school board, of course, one of the biggest issues in the last 20 years has been bullying. But yet, when I would watch some adults come into school board meetings, what were they doing? It's hard to explain to the students and give them examples and tell them where we need to go and how things need to work when they don't see it working that way. I think that's an area that we need to work harder at and do a better job of. I think we're getting better. I think everybody's getting better at the school level, and the students are beginning to see what works and what doesn't. And I think the more we bring it out and the more it's talked about, the better off we're going to be. They need to be civil. They're going to get farther by being nice to each other, listening, trying to understand the other side, and then understanding that sometimes things aren't going to go your way. Well, that's not the norm right now, but hopefully they will understand at times that you're not going to get it the way you want it, but next time you might. So don't give up. Keep learning, keep moving forward, and keep trying. And if you really want to make some changes, you've got to be part of the change. Don't just sit back and watch.
Governor Sullivan is a very apt technician. He has the microphone working. Thank you. Yes. The first thing that comes to my mind when I hear a very large question like that is maybe too simple an answer, but I think it all begins at home. I mean, that's where people learn their very first. That's where they see their very first examples, and that's where they learn, and that's the role models. And I think that it's very important that that we raise our children the way we would want them to be, and that comes a lot from example. I know I was raised that way, and it makes a big difference because those values are rooted very deeply at a very, very early age. So building on that, I know that's a simple answer, but I really believe that so much of what happens starts at home. And then, of course, as you expand your world and your life, you learn that there are other influences and that not everybody acts that way. But if you have those basic values instilled at an early age, why, I think it carries with you. I believe it carries with you. As far as where we're going, one of the things that comes to my mind about this whole situation is that you think that what you do doesn't matter. You think, I'm just one person. What can I do? It doesn't matter. But if every one person does their bit, then it begins to have kind of a snowball effect, and you'd be amazed, we all are amazed at the power of numbers. But it has to start somewhere, and you can't you can't expect an overnight shift on something that's been centuries in the making, let's face it. But I think if we all do our own part, and we carry that with us and influence one person, then that person can do the same, and eventually, hopefully, with the right people doing the right things for the right reasons. That's a lot of it. I think sometimes people do things for the wrong reasons. You have to be honest with yourself and say, am I doing what I'm doing for the right reason? But if we do, and if we take, one person, one community can become a model, that has an effect, and it begins to, I think, spread and grow. So I don't think we can expect an overnight thing, but I think things like this are a very, very good beginning, and I thank the group for hosting us today to have this discussion.
A big question has been well answered. I'm going to try to be quick on this, but I'll go to Nancy's simple solution and think back. Every time my brothers and I left our house, my dad said to us, be decent. And that's civility, and I've never forgotten those instructions, and it's the example that we talk about on a one-on-one basis. And it certainly does start there. But we have to have good role models and good examples. And when we don't, we need to talk about the fact that we don't. And going back to what was said, we have to stand up as individuals. We have to have meetings like this, in my view, to stem the tide that I believe, and politics is probably the most classic example of where civility has gone wrong. And it's my belief that it stems largely from money, unaccountable money, a desire for power, ambition, too much ambition, and 24-hour news, which just supports all of those other factors. Al mentioned what happened in Congress, and I keep thinking every time we have an election that if a new party gets in, they're going to realize how bad it was to be in the minority, and they will adjust in a civil way that brings results to a bipartisan discussion. But it doesn't seem to be happening that way. It escalates. They were doing this to us, so we're going to do this to them, and we're entitled to because they were doing this to us. All of a sudden you get this escalation that goes nowhere, and we've ended up where civility and compromise are four-letter words. And we can't let that happen because they are the yeast of democracy, whether it's at home or whether it's in Congress.
If I might just add one other cause of that, I think a lot of it stems from a lack of preparation, especially in our world of the law, that if you're not prepared, what better way to cover up than being loud and rude? And so those are both bad ideas. Well, Mike, you've apparently got a fan out here, because the question is, Governor Sullivan has said the yeast of democracy is civility and compromise. Yeah, and if you can't talk about it, democracy can't be sustained. So, here's the real question for you, and get that mic ready. What does it bode for our country when Wyoming's congressional delegation won't hold town hall meetings and listen to their constituents?
Well, I'm not going to join the crowd this afternoon of criticizing our congressional delegation, except to say that what I've already said is, as citizens, as citizen representatives, we all have to listen. And it's important that we listen, and we oftentimes don't get to listen to what we like to hear. So I believe whether it's town meetings like this or other town meetings, they can be very, very helpful. Now, I'm not saying whether they're holding or not holding them enough. It's difficult in these times. What does bother me, and it goes, I'll expand on those 4 items that I mentioned. Ambition, and this isn't directed at anybody specifically, but ambition, where instead of being a representative, representing your own value, your true values, and your constituents' values, you're not doing that because you're afraid that you may not get reelected. And that's widespread in this country, and it scares me when the end justifies the means. And we're not willing, where there is so much ambition for politics, that our decisions are based not on what is good for the country or good for our constituency or consistent with the values that we understand to be the case. It's based upon whether I'm going to get targeted and not get reelected. And that's or I'm going to offend somebody and not get reelected by standing up for what I believe.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
I would just say that that's the difference between a statesman and a politician.
Al, would you like to say anything about that?
I offered tickets to games if anybody could tell that anybody but me had given this definition of politics. Here it is. Here's all you need to know. In politics, there are no right answers, only a continuing flow of compromises among groups, resulting in a changing, cloudy, and ambiguous series of public decisions where appetite and ambition compete openly with knowledge and wisdom. That's it.
Okay. The Washington Post ran an article this AM on name-calling being normal in politics. How does that play with civility? I think you've addressed that, Al, in your answer. The Washington Post ran an article this AM on name-calling being normal in politics. How does that play with civility? I think your first answer addressed that, unless the writer wants to hear more. Okay.
Steve, let me just add
Sure.
2 other words that I think go with this discussion, and it goes with that question. Demeaning and demonization. And when we get into doing that as a routine in politics or in community, in life, as Nancy says, then we're moving the wrong way, and that's what we need to overcome. Demeaning and demonization or name-calling doesn't have a place.
Is there an example from history that you would hold up as this is the way to do this, or this is not the way to do this? Let's take the positive. If you have an example of this is the way to do this. Now, this is not the way to do this. There you go.
Well, I don't, I'm not that much of a historian, so I'll ask Al to footnote this answer. But I think if you look at where Lincoln was as president and the criticism that he took, yet he accepted compromise and worked to bring this country together by not letting people bait him into a position that could have forever ruined this country.
Well, Brother Pete, I don't know if he's here, but he's a historian, and he said something the other day. We were over doing the reenactment of the Johnson County War, very interesting history. And he said the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag ends, as we all mumble, with liberty and justice for all. Try that on again. Are you really doing that? I am. Or if you really, really pretend that you're politically correct, you're a liar. Because there isn't a soul in this audience that doesn't have a bias or a prejudice or a deep hatred feeling towards somebody or never forgive, never forget. And they pretend that I don't believe I've ever had a bad thought about it. And it comes out like a fissure through the side of a volcano. I think half the rage in the world is by that act. And that's a no-brainer. That can't work. But you know, if you want to talk about polls, try Bernie and Trump. You love them both? Have a drink.
What comes to my mind, when I was a young teenager, is when President Kennedy was president. And I'll never forget a speech that he gave where he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." And I think if you have that mentality, whether it's in politics or in community service or whatever, typically things will come out better than if you're wondering or doing things for you. That's why and I know there's discussion about this at political levels of all levels, but that's why I believe that compromise is an extremely important thing to work with and accept and feel good about when you're making a decision with a group of people. Senator Enzie's 80-20 rule, I think, is fantastic, and it's always worked well for me.
And what is that rule?
That rule is that if you go into an issue, and if you concentrate on what you agree upon, not what you disagree upon, and if you feel like you can come out of that conversation or with that decision with close to maybe 80% of what you wanted, it's a good decision. And if the other party feels that way as well. And I think that's a key to all of this, that you can't be civil by yourself. You know, you have to have two people that want to be civil.
Okay. I think you've all addressed this somewhat, but this is a great question. What advice would you give to citizens who feel frustrated that their voices are not being heard, who get no personal responses to their heartfelt letters written to their representatives, whose invitation for public dialogue are ignored? How do you keep them engaged?
I didn't represent Pennsylvania, so I didn't care about all that, but I represented a state where I told my staff, answer the damn letter. And even if it's bizarre, and then they'll say, why do you have town meetings? Only the nuts show up. I say, I know, but they vote for me, and I like the nuts. And there's about 15% of the population who are screwballs, lightweights, and boobs. And you wouldn't want those people unrepresented in Congress. And it's funny, but it ain't funny. But let me tell you, this is madness going on right now, true madness, and it's disheartening. And what do you tell people? It just try to some ray of hope, get involved in some way, or just at the grocery store, instead of pushing forward and crushing the guy in front of you, you could do a little differently there. You can do, those are tiny things, but when you're aggressive and hostile, you're that way, and then you get into politics and you get aggressive and hostile, and you can't just say, I hate to get specific because it's so volatile out there, but if you're calling Trump every name in the book, you're not civil. And if you're calling Bernie Sanders every name in the book, you're not civil.
I know there's different levels, and especially I've been to Washington, D.C. a few times and met with our representatives and others. I happen to sit on a water and wastewater board that represents 9 states, so we go to Washington every spring and work with everyone. And a lot of times we end up meeting with staff. I've always felt that the staff back there listened to us and passed the information on, and at times I did get to visit with the senators or representatives there. When I think about back to the school board, and I think about the phone calls and those types of things, in the school districts, we always had a chain of command. So if someone called me and was upset with something that happened in the classroom, I had the ability to say, first, you need to talk to the teacher, because I'm not well versed in what happened and what you're talking about, but would you start there? If it went farther and they weren't happy, and I told them, if you're not happy with your answer there, then you need to talk to the principal, tell them what's going on, and go from there. So it moved up through that chain. Sometimes by the time they got back to me, they were even madder because they had 5 people that had not listened to them. But at that point, then I always felt it was my obligation as the elected official to listen. Whether I could change the outcome of what their problem was or not, I don't know. We had some discussions and we could do some things, and some we couldn't. But always felt like I should listen. They need to be heard. They were parents in the district. They had every right for that because that's who I represented. It's tough even at the local level. I'm not sure how they do it sometimes at the national level, but I do know that I think if you can start civilly at a local level and try to work your way up, if you're not getting answers, you just need to keep trying and put in more information. But be civil and try to make that contact as much as you can. But I do think there is an obligation by elected officials to try to communicate and listen to their constituents.
The only thing I would add to those very good answers, and at the local level, it is a little bit different. I tried when I was mayor to answer every letter and every phone call. If I didn't, it was just because maybe there was a breakdown in communication and I never got the message. But I sure tried, because I think it's important. I think it's extremely important. That's also why we have elections. We're not a country where people are just automatically appointed. So if there's a high enough frustration with people that do not respond or do not listen, why we do have, thank goodness, the opportunity to change our representatives through election. I mean, that's a gift that we have in our country and part of our history. That's all I have to say on that.
I'm reminded of being in a local convenience store and approached by a lady who said, Judge Cranfield, I want to thank you for putting my son in prison. And I said, well, I'm sorry about that. He said, could you put my daughter in too? And I said, is she in the system? And said, no, not yet. And I said, well, you need to get her arrested, and I'll take it from there. That's a true story. Okay. To follow up then on what we just said, how do you recommend that I reach my representatives? Email, Facebook, phone calls?
I will say quickly that I know that there are representatives in the different areas around the state. Pam Boulin is a field rep for Senator Barrasso, Karen McCreary for Senator Enzi, and I'm not sure who it is for Representative Cheney right now, but in our district, in our area, there are representatives, and they came to City Hall 4 or 5 times a year, and they were wanting people to come to them, give them feedback, and often they didn't come. Now, I'm sure that it could be said, well, we didn't know that they were there, so there's always that communication that I'm sure could be improved. But I know that when I have spoken to those people with concerns or questions, they've been very, very good about getting the information to the senator or the representative and then getting back to me. So I think that's a conduit that we're lucky to have.
Mike?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't do Facebook.
And you've got such a pretty face.
I
too.
still, the roast was over.
That was a compliment.
I still write letters and use the telephone, but I don't know enough about the current offices to know what the best way to do it, except I think the local representative is a good place to start. Al might have a better idea currently, although.
Well, I can tell you, I'll never go on Facebook. I can just see the stuff raining in. If you looked at my email, you wouldn't believe the 4-letter words. And I knew all of them. And they are foul, absolutely foul. Ann Pendley is my gal, been helping me for about 16 years, bless her, and I know she's cutting them off because she'll feed me one every once in a while, knowing my response will be quite uncivil. And so I'm playing the game too, because I really get pained by calling in Nazi PF or whatever you want to concoct, and I can tell you I've seen it all. Anonymous, most of it. So whoever's doing the anonymous stuff, please keep doing it, because I don't read it anymore. I just take anything without a signature and throw it in a can and never touch it again, because they're never worthwhile. An anonymous note, "You're doing a great job, Al, I love you." I never got one of those. So I don't know why anybody would even think of it. So the venom is the ability to sit in your house having a suds and steaming hot and hitting a button that says send. That's sick. Those are sickos. And there are a lot of them out there.
I think that goes to the point of what we're talking about today. I guess I should have qualified what I said by a civil question or a civil concern. Name calling has no place.
Okay, Al, let's follow up that then with, how does one maintain civility or compromise with a white supremacist?
I don't know, but I don't think you need to call somebody a white supremacist who just doesn't like Robert E. Lee. Now listen before I finish. I think I know only 3 despots in my lifetime who were trying to rub out their culture. Hitler, Mao Zedong, and Joseph Stalin. What the hell is this all about? This is the culture of the United States. And if you can get a flash word, don't forget how this works. To kill or get something done or kill it, you use a deft blend of emotion, fear, guilt, or racism. A deft blend of emotion, fear, guilt, or racism. I ought to know. I chaired immigration. I chaired nuclear regulation. Chaired the Veterans Affairs. I am a veteran. veterans have a little different view about the flag. Sadly, we saluted it every day and served under guys maybe we didn't like at all. So there's so much out there, and it's so simplistic when people lock in on their thing, their cause, because their cause is just and noble. And the other guys are poops and slobs and commies and socialists and right-wing nuts and left-wing nuts. For me, it was very simple. I had a very supportive spouse, a wonderful woman, and I had, which abandoned sometimes, left me adrift. Humor is the universal solvent against the abrasive elements of life. And ladies and gentlemen, there is no humor in this country. And when humor disappeared, we began to go into the big trench. And now, any humor is distorted. Did you hear what he said? And the guy, thinking, wait, that's not what I meant. But I don't like to be called a white supremacist just because I think that our culture should be preserved, whatever the hell it is. Tired of it.
Any takers?
I just go back to what was said earlier. There is a limit to having a civil discussion. And there are individuals with which you can't have a civil discussion. And it's probably just as well to look for somebody with whom you at least have a chance to have a civil discussion. You can assess that. All of us have different levels of how much we can take. And when you reach the level that you're going to be invited over to act like the other side, then it's time just to back out and look for another pathway to civility.
I can't agree more with what Governor Sullivan just said. It takes two to be civil. So if you do get to the point, and it happens, where that can't happen, then you have a decision to make. You can't change what that other person might do. They have that decision. But you have a decision to make about how you are going to respond to it. And that can be walking away. It can be getting right down and, getting dirty right with them. And what does that accomplish ultimately? Or it can be a simple statement like, this is not going anywhere right now. So if you want to talk about it, I'm happy to talk about it with you, but you'll have to come back another day when you can talk about it in a decent fashion.
The other thing that comes to mind in what we're talking about is one individual. And I guess I don't see any place in government, local, state, or national, that you only deal with one person. If you can't deal with that person, and I've been there on the school board thing, whether it be a parent or another board member or a state board of ed, there's other ways. There's other people to talk to, and there's other avenues. You just have to find those so that you can be civil and work your way through things and not cause any bigger of a fight than we already have. But I think there are reasons that our government is set up the way it is, that there's not just one dictator or one avenue. There are checks and balances and a lot of different ways to go about doing things. And sometimes we have to be creative and figure out ways to get around that problem.
Well then, Dossie, how can you be civil when those in charge, i.e. administrators at universities and colleges, don't do their jobs and enforce the rules of polite free speech?
I've thought about that in watching some of the, I do read some of the social media stuff and you don't know what to believe. Both of my boys went through colleges, and there were things on those campuses that you're thinking, yeah, I'm glad you weren't a part of that, or listening to what they're doing. I think if enough people, those people are put in those colleges, they're elected in and hired in, but there's usually boards of directors. And again, there's not just one or two, there's several. And it may take time. You're not going to, we didn't get here in 2 years. We're not going to solve this in 2 years. But if you start working on who those people are that are running those colleges and what the beliefs are, you can change those board members or get through to those people. There may be a majority that believes they're doing the right thing. I might be the one that is the only one that's upset about what they're doing. You have to take that and work with that also. But I do think that there's, kind of like today, I'm going to go with the NFL thing. Do you watch football? Do you not watch football? I mean, they're kneeling for the anthem. They're doing all these things. Well, you have rights as to not watch them, not buy tickets, not do all these things if you like football. Those are all individual choices, but overall, the nation is going to figure out where they want to go with this. It's going to take some time. It's not going to be solved overnight, but I think if you take the time to work the path civilly, work to the top of the list of the board of directors or the people that are elected to represent the people, and there are enough that feel the same way you do, you will get somewhere, but you have to work at it. It's not something that sending 2 letters or getting in 1 or 2 arguments is going to solve. You have to work at it, and it's going to take time.
Steve, I think the thing I see is that we don't get to know each other. How can you sit with this device in front of you looking like a vacant hollow, and doing your little thing with this thing? You're not eating, you're embarrassing someone or sending out something nasty. You don't know the person. If you don't get to know a person, or at least have a talk with them, nothing is going to work in this country, especially if you can just bang away on an electronic device or do your Instagram as what you had for breakfast and all that crap. Curmudgeon, there's the definition of curmudgeon.
Senator Simpson, though, in defense of younger people who are more prevalent, more prone, more inclined to use social media, we got to be civil with them, too.
Well, Al, there are about 3 questions here that are really kind of the same and hit on what you've been talking about. And I read this full piece that Senator Hatch wrote, and he had the same experience you did with Ted Kennedy, and he talks about that. How do we get to know people if we don't see them socially, if we don't break bread with them? And there's this divisiveness, which you have described well within the parties, that they don't communicate with each other. How do we break that system? Or not system, but how do we get beyond that?
Well, there's another part of civility that is entwined and you can't escape, and that's called trust. There's no trust. People have no trust in each other. Party members don't have any trust look at John McCain if you want to get into a thorough uncivil discussion. What the hell, God, almighty, mumble. And that's pretty uncivil. I mean, they hate him, and they ought to do something with him. Well, he's dying. That's not much more you can do. But it's kind of sad to see that that's a savage current personal thing. With me, when I went to the Senate, it was the largest class in the history. 20 new senators, 1/5. And who were they? Bill Bradley, me, Nancy Kassebaum, Dave Pryor, Aaron Berger, it was a wonderful group, and we used to meet together once a month. And Byrd and Howard Baker, after 6 months, came to our meeting and said, "What do you do in here?" "Well, we talk." "Well, about what?" "Well, how to answer the mail," and vivid things like that. And they said, "Well, you ought to be part of your caucus." And we said, "Well, we're not." And we enjoy each other, and we did. So we got to know each other, and when the bill would come up, Bradley, I remember, said, "Now you're working on immigration. That's pretty serious with me. So I'm going to come to your office and talk to you." And I got a lot of questions. And I'm not going to bring any staff. I said, "No, you don't need to. I know the issue. I drafted the bill." He sat there for 3 hours. I answered every question. He said, "I'm going to support you all the way." And that's what we used to do. Now you can't do that. You're out raising money. Mike is absolutely correct. Take a look at this 28th Amendment. It's really serious business. They're working on the drafting of it because they want to be so careful, but there is one sentence that would cover it. A corporation is not a person under the First Amendment. And, the other part is interesting because I'm an advisor on this National Institute of Civil Discourse that came out from the congresswoman who was shot. And sometimes in their vigor, they get quite uncivil in a sense. They would never admit this. It's like me getting trapped by the mayor. That's it. Those things are evil. But there is a real thing about trust. I didn't care what Ted Kennedy did. That's not my function. There is a higher power of judgment out there than Alan K. Simpson. So when he'd say, "I'm with you," or "I'm not," or I won't show up, as I said. I remember Metzenbaum once, we were trying to approve Judge Downs. I said, "Metz, Downs is a Democrat. He's one of your people." Well, he said, "Yeah," but he said, "I have a photograph of he and Ed Hirschler and Dick Cedar of Casper laughing at some women who were burning their bras." I said, "Well, that would have been something, wouldn't it?" And so here's Hirschler, who was a terrific guy, and Mike, I knew, and Cedar from Casper, and Downs. I said, "Come on." I mean, there isn't anybody that could hang on that. He thought the Elks Club was a savage social organization. He said, "What's this ancient Arabic order of the Mystic Shrine?" I said, "Well, there are 18 of us sitting in the Senate, so ask them about the mysteries." The point being, Metzenbaum, when I laid him around, I said, "This is nuts. This is your guy, your party." And he said, "I feel so strongly about it, but I won't show up." And that was fine with me, because then we put Bill Downs on the federal bench, and he was terrific, and he is terrific, and he's a Democrat.
Well, okay. But that doesn't say anything about today. And for example, they're all talking now about health care and how it needs to be bipartisan in order to be effective. How do you convey to those guys that this will work if you'll have the guts to do it?
Well, I've worked for about 2 years on a thing called Simpson Bowles. We got 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, 1 independent. And people say, "Well, but you didn't get the full majority." But I said, that's a pretty good majority, 11 out of 18. Yeah, well, to get a little thought about what you did, who voted for it? Well, let's see. Dick Durbin of Illinois voted. Dick Durbin, that commie from Illinois? Yeah, he voted for it. Tom Coburn voted for Coburn, that Neanderthal Republican from Oklahoma. That's your country right now, ladies and gentlemen. You just identify this person and let the vent go. And that's going on all day. Nancy Pelosi. Oh, well, yeah, let's have a chunk out of her, and then let's go get, Schumer, and go get so-and-so. That doesn't answer the question, but there is a way out, and that's the knowledge of the other person and going to them. I had a terrible propensity after getting my foot deeply in my mouth, which is a 16-6E. That's why this is so fashionable here. And I'd go to the person, and they'd say, "What the hell do I want to talk to you about?" I said, "I don't know, but I want to talk to you because I'm not clear. I don't understand how we got to this breach." And I tell you, it was always a good result, and it came out of total hostility. I mean, deep as lawyers can be, and it was with lawyers. But I rant and I raise hell, but I'll go to the person, and that's tough to do. You have to swallow a lot of crow to do that, and I don't like it, but Ann insists that I do it.
Steve,
Well, I'm sure Ann would put some kale with that crow, too.
Steve, could I
Please.
just make an addition to that?
bet.
Because I'm sitting here thinking about bipartisanship, and there is at least some discussion now. People are starting to realize that unless we can get some kind of bipartisanship, we're just going to have the deep freeze we're in now. But Al has always said, and he's touched on it here, that we lost a lot of that when they weren't staying in Washington, living together, knew each other as families and people. And if you start thinking about it, and it goes back to about money, I see our representatives, and it's been the case for some time, coming back to Wyoming almost every week. And somehow that's benefiting our constituents. And it may be that we've demanded that. But I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's healthy for politics. I don't think it's very personally healthy to be on a plane 4 days a week or whatever it takes. But if they have to spend, Al would know the percentage, whatever percentage it is, raising money, and 2 days a week coming home, when is there going to be time within that narrow legislative time to be bipartisan? You're never going to develop a discussion with the other side if you don't have even the time to develop your position with your own party. And it's not only bipartisan in a party sense, but we have other tribalisms taking place too. We've got a rural and an urban issue that is very important to us here. And if our representatives don't have the time to spend talking to people about what it is about rural society that makes us a little different and our issues a little different, we'll just get sacrificed. And from time to time we do. But it's time, and it's personal contact, it's trust, and it's not being dictated by ambition or money. Somehow we've got to break that grip.
And are those the same elements that made you a successful ambassador? Because you were faced in another country with division and.
Well, let me just say, in all honesty, being an ambassador in Ireland from America was a really easy job. They love us in Ireland. Now there were difficulties, but patience and listening was it, and I wasn't running home because it was too far. So you're there all the time. And I go back to a question someone asked about, give you an example of what was done right. The one I should have given was George Mitchell, who handled the peace process for 6 years. And if there is anyone in this country, and I think Al would agree, who is the top hitter on civil discourse and civility, it's George Mitchell. He has more patience, more understanding, more common sense, and more trust, ability to develop trust in people than anyone I've ever seen. He is a perfect example of how civil discourse can be effective.
You'll never forget, I won't, the hearing, the Iran-Contra hearing, and Oliver North had testified rather passionately, and George had listened very intently, and he said, do you realize, Major North or Colonel, whatever his rank was, that we're all patriotic Americans?
I can't quite decipher the handwriting, but I think the gist of it is with this issue of the climate and whether that's taken on social, political dimensions as opposed to real climate science, the science debate, and what do we do about that? How should we be approaching that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Dr. Leighton Stewart. He's in our audience, and he's a very, very well.
I think it might be his handwriting.
He's a great guy to talk to about this. And there's obviously two different entire philosophies about the issue, and I don't think we have time to get into that issue today, but I think it pays to sometimes listen to both sides. Sometimes we get into a box where we just only listen to one side, so we never even think about what the other point of view might have to offer. And if you take the time to listen to both sides, then you can make a decision as an individual instead of being led by others.
Leighton, you okay? All right. Can we be specific? We have a president who seems to be the antithesis of everything you've described. He doesn't model civility or respect. What do we do?
Well, let me just start by saying I agree with the question, the content of the question, and I worry that that is leading us in the wrong direction. So I would say specifically, we can sit here and talk about civility. We can understand what it is. We can teach our children what civility is so that they recognize incivility when they see it and are willing to speak up against it. I will say, at the risk of being trapped here somehow, one of my biggest disappointments in the current system is that people aren't willing to stand up and say that is not acceptable. And it needs to come from our leaders. We can't have so much writing on politics that we're willing to throw our values aside. You know, I believe Mr. Trump is my president. President Trump is my president. I want him to be successful. We've got too much riding. I'd like to see him be successful. But if somebody isn't willing to stand up and say that is unacceptable, he's never going to know. I mean, it may not make any difference anyway, but I believe there are people elected to positions that are sitting on their hands, and that is unacceptable.
What's really interesting is that 63 million people voted for this gentleman, guy, whatever you want to call him. And I'm fascinated. You think, well, I think I'll maybe punch him up a little. And then somebody said, wait a minute. And somebody you really respect. And there are plenty of them in this county. They're not nuts. And so it's the same old game, you know. I think he's erratic. I said in the primary they could give him an enema and bury him in a shoebox. But no one understood. No one understood the term. The shoebox. People are 16, but Obama, I didn't like Obama. I thought he was wishy-washy and weak, but he was my president, like it or not. And there is something down there that if that disappears, then you're headed for what is called a little worse than white supremacists or NAFTA or anti, whatever it's called, anarchy. You don't want any of that. That's nothing. And it means nothing. They just want to do whatever they want to do in a hedonistic way. That won't get you anywhere. But it is unnerving to me to see how many times he can. I blast away at 3 in the morning on Twitter, which I know nothing of, but he apparently has 50 million people twittering with him, tottering and twittering. I recommended only one thing, that he should have breakfast and then Twitter, and not do any of it at 3 a.m. after watching some, cable business. It's funny, but it ain't funny. And now to take on the athletes and the NFL and the national basketball, you can't. But when you have a guy like LeBron James calling the president a bum, where's the civility? It's going to get worse. Now back to climate change. No.
My thinking, and are we done? Okay, we're done.
Shoot, I had my last page. We've only got a minute left, so I want to thank all of you. That went pretty quickly, I think. Unless
Please? Did I hear a please?
you can be civil about that. And so let me close with the final paragraph of Senator Hatch's article. In the wake of the attack on members of Congress, I have reflected at length on the circumstances that led us to this point. While it may be difficult to trace the erosion of civility to any single factor, one thing is certain. Our nation cannot continue on its current path. Either we remain passive observers to the problem, or we endeavor to act to make the necessary changes in ourselves, in our families, and in our communities. And that will lead to a more civil, prosperous society. And to that end, I recommit myself to be civil with members of Congress, with greater civility in my day-to-day interactions with all fellow Americans. I hope you will join me in doing the same. So thank you for sharing part of your afternoon with us. We have concluded. Thank you very much.
Oh, we can get it.
I don't know how to turn this off.